Hello everyone. How are you all doing? Okay. So, I'm going to start my presentation, and I would like you to raise your hand if you think that today's web ecosystem seems to be getting harder and harder and harder every day. So, okay, people getting shy, but okay, so I see some hands raised. Well, if you raise your hand, let me tell you, I agree with you. I remember when I built my first web application a couple of years ago, and it started with HTML. Okay, I was writing some HTML, then I had the need to style it, so CSS, which I was terrible at. Wait, let me rephrase that. I'm terrible at. And then I had the need to get some data that wasn't stored in a database somewhere. So we went with the old gold PHP. So what happened was the browser in HTML triggered the request to the server. PHP grabbed that request, connected with the MySQL database, generated the new HTML, sent it back to the client, and the browser rendered it. And that's all I had to know at the time to build a web application. Seemed fairly simple. Then, 5 years after, I built my first React application. Now, I didn't only have to know HTML and CSS. Now I needed JavaScript. And let me remind you, I'm terrible at CSS. You will know why I'm putting an emphasis on this a bit later. But okay, now we had JavaScript. There was no PHP, we had JavaScript, we had stuff running on the client. And it kind of felt simpler until someone told me, but that's not enough. You need to add a couple other stuff. So first things first, we're using JavaScript. So we don't like to use plain JavaScript, let's type it. So we brought TypeScript. Then we had to bundle stuff, so we brought Webpack. Okay, 2 more things, not just 4 anymore. Cool. Until someone told me again, wait, this is React, so you're going to have to choose one of the 99,000 million state management packages that exist out there. And then we had to go with Redux for client state and 10-stack query for the server state. Okay, more stuff to learn, but manageable. Hopefully we won't have to learn anything else. Yeah, I was already terrible in CSS. Now I was going to be terrible in CSS in JS because we were going to add style components to the application. Then for some reason, we had to re-implement a bunch of other stuff that the browser and the web already gave us. So React took form to managing form state, because that's a thing. React Spring to manage animations, and React Router to do routing in the page. Now picture for a second that you don't know any of these things. And someone tells you, you have to learn all of them so that you can build a web application. Right? Just the amount of code that we have to learn to build an application nowadays. Also, a thing that I kind of see here is, why are we re-implementing stuff that the browser and HTML already gave to us in the past? Why are we adding so much complexity? So let's look at the following tweet. This is a tweet by Dominic. He's one of the maintainers of 10-stack query. You don't have to understand everything what's happened here, but let's just count some steps. So first things first, there's a button that when on click does a Redux dispatch. This dispatch has a payload with 2 parameters. There's no reducer using it, just a saga that will pick it up. This saga will yield a call effect that will forward this payload, and this payload will be used to set the window location href. We could have done this previously with just an anchor tag. That's all we needed to add, an anchor tag, like that thing with those braces, I don't know the name, and an A in the middle. That's all we needed back in the old days. Now, apparently, we have to go through all this complexity. And to that, I ask another question. And you don't need to raise your hands. I just want you to reflect on it. When did we start forgetting about the platform? Really, think about it. Because it feels like somewhere along the process, we traded fully tested stuff and fully implemented stuff to do it ourselves. I miss the simpler times. I miss whenever I wanted to data mutations, I added a form to the page. That's all I had to do. There was no state management at all. I miss when I wanted to change a route, I added an anchor tag to the page, I clicked it, and it sent me to the new route. There was no buttons with on-click events or other customizable stuff. And another thing, I really missed when URLs actually represented what we were seeing on our UI. Because nowadays it feels like I'm playing a game. So when you lose in a game, you have a game over. When I refresh the page, I have the same feeling, because it seems like I'm being sent back to the beginning of the page. Because somewhere along the process, it kind of feels like the URL don't represent the UI we are seeing. And to that, I ask the question again. When did we start forgetting about the platform? When did we trade it fully tested, accessibility, security, for the sake of, nope, I'm going to implement all of these things by myself because I don't care about what the browser already has. I'm in charge now. I'm going to be responsible for adding features, updating them, fixing bugs, and anything else that comes with that, because that's kind of it. Because it kind of feels like somewhere along the process we forgot about the browsers. We forgot about the web. Really, we forgot about the web. And to that, I'm going to start my presentation. The title of this talk is Learn Remix, Accidentally Learn the Web. So, first things first, I'm Daniel Afonso. In case you don't recognize, I'm the person on the right of the photo. I'm working as a developer advocate at OLX. I'm an Aged.io instructor. I'm an Altier ambassador, and you can find me on Twitter and pretty much any handle at DanielJC And I'm the soon-to-be author of the book that's going to be released in around 2 weeks called State Management with React Query, which might have a couple of things with Remix in it, but that's a surprise for when it comes out. Okay, so before we get into Remix, I want you to come with me on a journey, and let's time travel a bit of where we started with the web, where we are right now, and what's probably going to be there in the future. So, when we started, we had MPAs, multiple page applications. We had single HTML files that routed between themselves by using the browser. We had a server somewhere that received a request from the browser, generated a new HTML, and sent it back. That was the traditional way. There was no JavaScript on our page back then. It was just HTML, CSS if you want, HTML and the server. Then we said, okay, now we want to make our user experience a bit better, so let's add JavaScript into it. And this was when we entered the sprinkles phase, when we got into, okay, now let's customize a bit more of our UI and add JavaScript to our page to enhance our user experience. But doing so, we kind of impacted our developer experience. And by doing this, there was a new need. We had to learn something new. And that's when the single-page applications era began. When we now have, first things first, we kind of just forgot about the servers in the beginning. Now we're getting back there, but we kind of just forgot about the servers. Everything was on the client side. And the developer experience was kind of better, but I have a couple of points to make about that. And then something is going to happen. There's a new something on the horizon, something new that's showing up, something that hopefully is the web next transition, kind of. So I'm going to show some code now, just to go through some examples. So all the examples you're going to be seeing, at least in the next couple of slides, are a variant of this HTML file. So here we have an HTML file that has a title, has an H1 there, then it has a form, because forms are how we did mutations traditionally back then. And we have a div to show the notes. So this is pretty much a note-taking app where you can only add notes. So let's look at this. So interacting with this page, we're going to see a couple of things. First things first, there's only HTML file in the network tab, because every time we send some data there, this data is, the browser picks it up, generates an HTTP request, sends it over the network to the server gets that payload, generates the new HTML, sends it back to the client, and the browser says, okay, now this is what we're going to see. And that was how it was back then. There was no JavaScript in this. Let's look at how our server is implemented. So this is an Express server that we're pretty much having a connection to a database just to add and get some notes. We set up our server, first things first, and then we set up our route. So every time we receive a request, we're going to check if it is a post. If it is a post, we're going to add a note to our database, because that's what we want to do. Then we get all the notes that are already in the database, and we say to the server, hey, now on the response back to the browser, you're going to send this generated HTML, which now has the new notes there. So this is how it worked back then. The browser sent the post, the server got it, generated the new HTML, and sent it back to the client. And some people could argue, okay, but there's no interactivity. How does the user know that something is being sent? How do they know? Well, I want you to look at the tab up there where it says my MPA when I do the request. So first things first, I'm putting the SO network, while this, just to give it a bit more time. But now when I click add, there was a spinner there. That was the traditional way. Kind of browsers gave feedback to the user already. There was no flashy spinners on our page. The browsers took care of that. But well, there were a couple of issues with this approach. First things first, there were full page refreshes, because every time we did a post, the data went to the server returned the HTML, and the browser had to refresh so we could render the new page. So it kind of would lose the point. For instance, as if you are input focused on something, you would lose that focus, because now you're rendering something new every time the request was triggered. And then we had that lack of dynamic stuff. There was no JavaScript on the page, so we only had to use what the browser gave us. So we kind of just went in with the JavaScript way. And that's when the sprinkles area began. We started shipping JavaScript just to enhance our user experience. And let me focus there. JavaScript was there to enhance the user experience. Everything worked the same way, with or without JavaScript. And the example is pretty much the same, but now we have a client JavaScript file being shipped into the browser with us. And this client is responsible for, first things first, updating the notes, in this case, triggering a post request by itself, and updating the UI by himself. So the client was responsible for doing the post request and updating the UI. And this was JavaScript taking care of everything now. If you want to walk into our server, now it's pretty much the same thing, but we have an endpoint just to do the post. And there's another thing here, which is, if we scroll down a bit, you're going to be able to see that there's a new thing now. We added the script element there. So pretty much we're telling HTML, hey, when you render this page, I want you to load this client, JavaScript. This was the traditional way that we used to do it. And, okay, this is a server. Now you want to know a bit more about the client. So now we added JavaScript. So first things first, we wanted to make sure that whenever the DOM loaded, we could get our form that was there and created an event listener. So we told the form, hey, whenever you submit, you're going to do something. And I'm going to stop right here. You're going to do event prevent default. Now, I don't know if you know about event prevent default, but when I was taught about it, it was kind of like, I remember some senior developer at the time told me, hey, so you're just doing this because you want to prevent the event from bubbling up. And I was like, okay, I don't fully understand what that means, but if that's the description you gave me, I'm going to run with it. And I kind of used it for 1 or 2 years and in a couple of job interviews, but let's not think about that right now. What event prevent default does is pretty much telling the browser that we don't care about what he's going to do next. So event prevent default is there so that we say, hang on browser, I take it from here. Now it's my responsibility to do all the things you are going to do. So, going back to this scenario, we do the listeners, we get the form, we add an event listener for the submit, and then we tell the browser, hang on there, I don't care about you right now, I'm going to take care of this myself. And with that, first things first, when we get the post, we have to get the data that was sent over the post. So we get the data, we're going to get the data immediately right now, and we're going to generate the body, and we're going to generate the HTTP request, and we're going to do it by using fetch. Once we do that request, we're going to get the response from the server, and get the data and load it into the client. So as you can see there, at the end, we get our note list, we create a new P element, and add the note there and append it to the file. And this was something that showed up. This is if you use jQuery, this was kind of an alternative to this and to give it a bit better of a developer experience, even though that can be argued. But yeah, now the browser was not taking care of stuff. We were, when JavaScript was enabled. But they started having an issue here. So remember this code that we have there to add stuff to the list? Let's go back into our server. It's exactly the same type of code, because now we have code duplication. We're doing on our servers the same things we were doing on our client. There was a duplication because we needed to be sure that whenever JavaScript failed, the server could go back in to make it work. But this kind of increased the discrepancy between client and server. So we had some issues with this approach. First things first, this is where we start ignoring the browser. And as a consequence of that, we had a bunch of new code to handle. Now we have to have code on a client, we have to have code on a server, and with that came a code duplication. So the same code to do the same thing existed on a server and on a client. And this kind of contributed to increased server-client confusion. So it was at this time that traditional full-stack developers started disappearing, and we had front-end and we had back-end. The back-end was responsible for the server, the front-end was responsible for the UI. They didn't meet each other until the team ceremony at the day, and that's kind of what started happening at this time. And first things first, our developer experience kind of took a hit, because now a bunch of duplicated code and a bunch of new stuff. So there was an alternative. That's when SPA showed up, single-page applications, and they promised a better developer experience. So let's look at SPA. So here we have a React application that's doing pretty much the same thing we had previously, but now when we render our page, we trigger a GET request, When we do a note, we do a post. The UI is actually updated because now the server is not handling anything. It's only the client. So look into the code. Here we have a React component. So first things first, notes are state. Everything is state now. Then we have a use effect which is responsible for getting all the notes whenever the page first renders. And yeah, now we have to take care of holding states ourselves because why not? Then we have our form, which is pretty much the same thing, but we just copied the code we had on the client previously to this component. So, but there's a difference. Now we update the state to add the new notes. And from using that state, we render the note list. So that's our client right now. If we look into our server, now we had to start dealing with CORS issues because that's something new that showed up right now. And we had to implement the endpoints. And this, like I said, there was a discrepancy and more. There was no client, there was no server, there was front end and there was back end. They were separating themselves from each other. And now the kind of issue that started to happen here. Let's disable JavaScript on this page and try to refresh it. Yeah, now you cannot use your application anymore if you don't have JavaScript because you depend on it. And this has a bunch of issues. So first things first, the same issues as JS Sprinkles. The client-server confusion started becoming even more apparent right now. Because when we started with MPAs, the client was here, the server was here, and as we kept progressing until we got to the SPAs, now the client was here and the server was down there. Another thing, now increased bundle sizes, because now all of the packages you add to your React application is being shipped to the client. And this kind of leads to the next step. Performance issues, because we want to add everything there, every cool library, every cool new package, and then the one who suffers is our user, because our page application becomes terrible. And then state management. So many discussions about state management. That's the thing. Try to be in a group with a bunch of React developers for a day and have zero discussions about state management. I dare you to try to do that. So what's the next step? Where are we going? Where do we want to go with the web? Well, MPAs didn't have amazing user experience, but it was good. You didn't have to depend that much on JavaScript. Well, we could even argue that the sprinkles area became a bit better because now you were using JavaScript to enhance the experience. SPAs, on the other side, added amazing developer experience. Your experience now, compared to writing a full jQuery application that we had to do back then, it kind of feels a bit better. What if we could get all of the cool things of all these other phases and go into the future? What if we could combine MPAs with SPAs? What if we could do this? Think about it. Let's see the issues that we had with each one of them and we'll go through it. So, full page refreshes. Now, JavaScript is there to emulate the browser and do exactly the same thing that the browser does, but adds a couple of other caveats and a couple of other extra stuff that you will see. But now we use the default behavior. We use the web how we learned it. We do the same patterns we were doing with MPAs. Well, if we have JavaScript, we can add the dynamic stuff, so we don't suffer from the same issue. Another thing, ignoring the browser. That's no longer an issue because what we are promoting here is even if we use client-side JavaScript to emulate the browser, we're still going to go into the web standards. We're still going to use the same things that we were using back in the MPA days. And the code duplication and new code to handle, what if we could add the same code on the server and the client? How cool would that be? Think about it. Now with the SPA issues, bundles, code is on the server. I'm not sending anything to the client anymore. Cool, saved a bunch of extra space. And performance issues probably will reduce, but JavaScript is there to enhance the experience, not to control it. So ideally, our web pages should load without JavaScript. And JavaScript can kick in later and be there to enhance it. They added a bit more flavor. Finally, state management, gone. The browser can handle its state. The browser has become pretty good at doing all these things. So, now that's when we get to Remix. Remix is one of the solutions that kind of embrace this process. And I know what you're going to say. Daniel, another JavaScript framework? Really? That's what you're trying to pitch to us? Yeah, sorry about that. That's kind of the issue of living in the JavaScript world. There's new, like someone already said today, that if you kick a rock, a new JavaScript framework is going to show up back there. Well, the thing with Remix is it kind of embraces all these standards that I told you. This is the default description they have in Remix. I tried to ask ChatGPT to do a better one for me, but after like the 10th attempt, he couldn't do it, so I just gave up and went with the default one. But Remix is pretty much a full-stack web framework that will let you focus on the user interface and work back through web standards to deliver a fast, slick, and resilient user experience. And let me tell you, when I started using Remix the first time, I felt very, very nostalgic, because I felt I was back in the PHP days when I had to learn only 4 things to build a web application. I know that for some people, PHP is a bug, is a monster, you want it away from you. Well, it is what it is, but I'm a nostalgic person, so that kind of brought me back to it. So before I'll show you some code, there's just 3 things that you need to know to understand it fully. First thing are loaders. So first, be aware that everything here is running on the server. So loaders are there to, whenever you need to load something, whenever your page first renders, or whenever you trigger a GET request, the browser will send that request to the server, and it will run the loader. So in this scenario, what we're doing up there, this loader is returning a JSON with this data. So now you might be wondering, what is that? So this is us emulating the browser. The JSON is pretty much an abstraction over sending back an HTTP response with the content type header set as application JSON. So that's pretty much what that thing is doing. We are leveraging HTTP requests and responses. We are leveraging the stuff that we have been doing for many years. And that data is returned, and when we get into our component, we get that data by using the useLoader data hook. We grab that data, we get our heroes in this case, and we render them. And this is loaders, data fetching pretty much. Now what do you do if you want to do mutations? Well, the traditional way, forms. Forms are there to perform mutations. You do a post, you define what's your action you want to trigger. Whenever the user triggers that submit, this data is going to go to the server and run an action. And how does this work? This action has access to your request. And think about it. The browser took care of these things. The browser whenever you submit a form, the browser already has the form data. You don't need state management because the browser keeps that information for you. And when it triggers automatically that HTTP request, you can have access to it there. And you get that request, you access your form data, and in this scenario, you create your data. Then we are doing a redirect. What is that redirect? It's pretty much an HTTP response with a redirect header set. The same thing as we've been doing back in all these years. Now, this is not coding per se, but it's an idea that's important to be aware when learning Remix, which is nested routing. So, nested routing is pretty much the idea where you can couple parts of your URL to define your component hierarchy. So looking at this example, we have 2 pages here, the user profile and user account. So first things first, there's a couple of common things there. There's the user up there and the user up there. This is whenever you're in the user route. You're on the user route, so this kind of defines that specific part of the UI. Now imagine you want to show the profile page. This is where nested routing comes in. You add the profile into your URL, and this code is rendered inside of that container. So we can nest layout inside of layout inside of layout. And yeah, your URL is representing your UI. How cool is it? So now, let's look at some code that I pre-built so I don't have to suffer doing live coding here. Which definitely probably has some cool CSS, or not. So, let's get into it. So what we have here, well, first things first, I tried to do a poorly adaptation of what's at Virtualist, and Virtual is one of the products that we have at OLX. And here we can do a couple of things. We can view a list of cars that were added, and we can add some new ones, as is right now. So, getting into the code. So everything, oh, and another disclaimer here, I'm using Remix v2, so if you already use Remix and see some things that you're not familiar with, it's because they changed. I'll try to go through it to give you a bit more background, but if you have any questions after, you can reach out to me. So here we have our main route, and this route here, first things first, you know it's a route because it's inside of the routes folder. This route defines the main route. It defines this container here. Now, imagine that I want to go to the view cars list. So I click view all, and now you can see my URL rendered list. And the main part is still here, because this is a nested route. So this is what we have here as the main.list. So one change that happened in V2, traditionally you had folders to define a set of routes. Now you have what it's called flat routes. So you do main.list, and this kind of represents main/list, main.create, main/create. If I wanted to do main create something, you would do main.create.something. It will show on the UI like that. So we just saw nested routing. Let's look at the code. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, considering nested routing. How do we let our routes know that there's going to be some code nested inside of it? By using an outlet. So this is pretty much here to tell Remix, hey, this route, if something shows up on the files that is appended afterwards, all the code is going to be rendered inside of this. And this is how we make sure that, and as you can see, super amazing CSS, hard-coded. But that's pretty much how this handles it. Another thing that we can do per route in Remix, you can define the meta information. So this is pretty much for SEO standards, but remember, you used to do this traditionally hard-coded in the HTML, and with Remix you can do that per route as well. So all you have to do is, for each route, kind of return the information that you want your browser to show and in the SEOs to scrape. So you can, for instance, here you can have a bunch of other stuff. Okay, so let's look at data creation. Let's look at our create component. So we kind of had the same meta information. We had a couple of other things. As you can see, the title changed as well from one to the other, just to show you that this works. The tab is updating. Nothing much, but it's cool. And so how do we create data in here? So let's look into our add card. So this is a form. Why do I know it's a form? Because I have a component here. And this component, if I go a bit down, it's a form. Now, if you know React, you might be asking, why is this a component and not a traditional form for JSX? This is where emulation of the browser picks up. So this is where Remix gives you exactly the same things as the browser gives, but it allows you to do some extra stuff that if we have time, I'll show you. If not, you can come to me after and I'll show you. So we have forms, and we have a bunch of input and a bunch more of terrible hard-coded CSS. So whenever we do a post, so if we go back into the form part up here, whenever we do a post, the component where this is the route where this is being rendered, which is in this case is this one, is going to go into our action. So our action here is pretty much gives access to that request. And from that request, I can get the form data. Because remember, the browser does that for you. When you do a submit, the browser already has the form data. It will send it over the wire back to your server. You get that form data. Here I'm just generating an object, so I have an object that respects my TypeScript rules, because whatever. And then I'm doing a bunch of extra validations. If any of these validations fail, I'm going to throw a bad request. And this bad request is pretty much a wrapper over JSON that will return with the status 400. HTTP response with 400 error. If everything's okay, I create my data and I redirect it. Let's just see this working. So something. I'm just going to use all the auto input suggestions just to save me a bit of time. Okay, add car. And here we have Bruno Leix saying hello. So, okay, this works. Now, one thing that I've been asking, that's actually something that I kind of struggled when learning Remix, because I was stuck into the client paradigm, was, okay, but what about client-side validations? What library are you using to do that? How do you make sure that the users input all the data that you need? Well, I'll show you how. By using HTML, the traditional HTML. You have required stuff. You can tell the browser that this field is going to be required. And you can also tell it that, for instance, this number input, the minimum value it can have is 0. So if we go back to the form and try to submit it, the browser is going to make me submit it, make me add the information. As you can see, clicking. I have to add it. Please fill in. Let's add some negative values. And the browser already does all of these things for us. And here we are discussing new ways to do form validations while we could just leverage what we have in the browser. Well, it is what it is. Let's go at our lists now. So first things first here. We have also the meta information. We have our loader. So this loader is responsible for going into our database, getting that data, and if there was an error, we throw a response with a 404. and if we got the data, we return it, so that inside of our function, in our list cars component, we can use the useLoader data hook to get that data, and then map over it and render it on the page. Another thing that we have here is error boundaries. This is if you use Remix before, this is something that's changed. Previously, we had catch boundaries and error boundaries. Now only exists error boundaries, because traditionally catch boundaries were there to catch errors that came from HTTP for 400 or 500 errors. That was the use case for catch boundaries. Now they kind of just grabbed everything together and put it for error boundaries. So, but you can still do catch boundaries. So there's a function here called useRoute error response that whenever you have an HTTP error like this one, you can grab it. So for instances, if I fail this, which is going to throw a 404 error, it should render this part of the UI. Cool. For any other type of errors, if I want to throw an error here, for instances, it's going to go into the error boundary itself, or the traditional error boundary. So kind of just feels like the same thing, because I'm amazing at CSS, but oh well. So yeah, this is lists. This is pretty much what we have and what we can use to do data fetching, and kind of leveraging all of the stuff we had on the browser. One extra thing that I want to show you is this thing here. So you might be asking, why is there a $sign? This is when in nested routing you want to tell Remix that, hey, look, if there's a route that is not matching any of the ones we have here, we create a dynamic route. So why is this useful? Well, let's go back into our list. Did I forget to save? Yes, I did. Let's go back into our list. When we go into this page, as you can see here, URL representing the UI we're seeing, we have an ID, and this is kind of the ID of this car in the database. So instead, we don't know the IDs. We're not going to be hard coding and creating a route for each one of them, obviously. So this is where dynamic routing fits. Here, we can tell Remix, okay, when there's nothing that matches anything that we have here, I want you to get that ID, in this case, assign it to a car ID variable, so that then, when I come into my loader, I can access my parameters and get that car. This invariant function is just there to throw an error in case there's nothing set, and then we get that specific car ID, and that's pretty much it. Oh, one other thing I have to show you still is this button is a form to delete the car. So just here to delete the car. And one cool thing here is there's no state here. We are not keeping any type of state to know what's the ID that we want to delete from the database. But if I click on it, it works. It disappeared. Why? Because in our form, because remember, forms are how we do mutations. We have something here which we used to do back then, which was need an input. So this was not read by screen readers or anything else. And we use this input, so whenever we do a submission and we go into our action, that input comes part of the browser, part of the form data. So that was kind of a traditional way to do it. Another cool thing that I haven't shown you is, now let's open the network tab. Check what happens when I over one of these cars. Oh, a request popped up there. Why? Well, traditionally in the browser we could do something like link rel prefetch to tell the browser that thing we're seeing, whenever the user over it, we want you to prefetch the data for the next page and cache it so that whenever the user goes into it, he can see it. So let's look a bit again. If I go over it, it did the request, I went to the page, and now if we click on that request, you're going to see here that comes from the prefetch cache. Because the browser took care of that thing for us. How cool is this? And here we are thinking about a bunch of caching solutions just to use on a browser, when the browser already does a bunch of other things, specifically from this scenario and also with cache control headers. And let me see if I forgot anything to show you. We saw the cars, we saw the forms. Yeah, I think I showed you pretty much anything that I can show with the time that I have right now. So let's go back to the slides. So, okay, Remix seems cool, but what's the point of this presentation? Well, I want you to take a quote out of it. Use the platform until you can't. Then augment what is missing. And when you augment, do so with care, because the responsibility of ensuring security, accessibility, and the performance that the platform tries to give you by default falls entirely up to you. Really, think about it. The reason why SPAs and sprinkles showed up was that we wanted amazing user experience. Now the question is, where is it? Because it kind of feels like we forgot about it somewhere along the process. Another thing, the reasons why SPAs showed up was because we wanted to have a better developer experience. But nowadays, there are so many packages, so many things showing up that we have to learn throughout the day that, thinking about it, the complexity we had back in the sprinkles area is better than all the stuff we have to learn nowadays. You be the judge of that. Another thing, you don't need to use Remix. Choose whatever resonates with you. Remix is just a way to reach this goal, a way to do this solution that has MPAs and SPAs combined, and at the same time brings us all back to the standards. There are other frameworks doing the same thing. SvelteKit, Solid Start, they are all doing the same thing that Remix does. You don't have to choose Remix. I just chose Remix because, like I said previously, I'm a nostalgic person, and I kind of resonated with being back in school just writing PHP and HTML back then. Another thing, and this is what I would like you to take from this presentation. Use the platform. Use the platform until you can't anymore. The browsers have become pretty good in the back days, in the past years, sorry. They are fully tested, they have the security that you forgot, they have the accessibility, and they have all the other things we forget to implement when we are taking care of these things by ourselves. Really, think about it. The next time you're having a discussion with your project manager because you want to prioritize adding accessibility to a component, but they don't see the value of it, but then you start having users all around the world that are using screen readers that they cannot use your application, think about it. What if you have used the platform from the start? Use the platform. Use the platform until you can't anymore. And only when you cannot do it anymore should you think, okay, what's next? Thank you, everyone. I'm Daniel Afonso. You can find me and pretty much all the social handles. Like I said, this is just a QR code if you want to check my Twitter page. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Man, thank you so much a lot.
Thank you.
Again, I'm going to ask you to join us for the questions.
Let's do it.
Okay, Daniel, this is not on the questions here, but later on you're going to tell me how much Remix is paying you.
Nothing.
Okay, so the first question is from Malik. After Next 13 implemented most of the features of Remix, why would I choose Remix over Next?
Yeah, that's the thing that I told you. You choose whatever you want to. But the thing is, Next has already been set up as kind of a standard nowadays, and especially with Next 13, you have pretty much a bunch of the same features. But the thing is, it has a lot of baggage. And what I mean by this is, the thing with Next is, first things first, it does it in a React way. It kind of just forgets about all the web standards in the process. It kind of tried to do a bunch of the same things as Remix. It had a nested route in their way of their name. I don't know how they call them. But they have nested routes. They have the concept of loaders and mutations as well. But they don't do it in a way that embraces using the platform. So far, the only frameworks that I'm aware that are going in the same way is SvelteKit and Solid Start. So yeah, that's the thing. Nowadays, we can't all change what we are using because we have apps running in production. For instance, as in OLX, we are using Next. So we already started using Remix in some of the projects because I kind of bothered a couple of people to use it. But yeah, choose whatever fits for your needs. And if Next is it, you don't need to change.
Awesome. Okay. So next question is from Alex. How to handle complex form validation that the regular HTML rules cannot handle?
I think it kind of depends. It's all a question of trying to understand if the browser already supports them. There are going to be scenarios that it's not going to work, but the thing is, there are certain alternatives. There are Remix, a tool that's been created that's Remix Forms, that kind of tries to give you a bunch of other stuff while embracing the same web standards. So just to make sure that it keeps emulating the browser. So there are alternatives. There are stuff showing up out there, but the kind of issue and the thing that I try to put up when speaking about forms is that nowadays we kind of just go to the libraries first. We don't bother to look into the documentation, MDN docs, HTML docs, or if we do, we kind of just already go with the idea, okay, now I'm going to use JavaScript to do this. So yeah, first things first, please make sure that the browser cannot handle it. If it cannot, then reach out to these tools. Remix Forms is a very good one as well.
Okay. Next question from Thiago Moreira. How do you manage state data that is not dependent of a form?
State data that is not depending on the form. So here, that's the thing. You have to, you can reach out to me after. We can discuss a bit more about what are the types of state data you are discussing. So far, and I've been using Remix for 1.5 years, so I didn't have to use any extra type of state management with it. Because by combining loaders, by combining all of the stuff that the browser already gave to me, you'll get very surprised very soon with all the stuff that you don't need to have in your applications. But yeah, I'm free to discuss any details after.
Awesome. Okay, one of the last questions. It's from Miguel. If you had to sell Remix to an alien who knows nothing about web development, call it a designer, how would you do it?
Oh, that's a cool thing. Let me think about it. That's an interesting question.
That's an interesting question. All right, we got this from you. Wait, give me a sec. Malik, can I see your hand up? Awesome, man. You just got yourself a ticket to the Vue.js. Miguel? Sorry, Malik, it's not you, man. I tried. You paid me earlier, but it didn't. So I'm pretty sure you're Miguel. Who's Miguel? Miguel, I'm really sorry, man. You're getting the ticket. Awesome.
Great question, by the way. So that's a very cool point. The way that I try to sell Remix to people that don't know even anything about the web is, web was built in a way. Web has standards. Web has all of the things that we expect developers to learn when building their first HTML file. Remix helps you embrace those things and kind of takes away of all the complexity that we have in today tools that we use to build our applications. I don't know if this kind of helped if you are a bit more confused as well. Sorry if I did that. But yeah, that's kind of the selling point that I have with it. And congratulations, you're going to Vue event.
Awesome. Okay. Like I said, we're running a little bit late. So if you guys have any questions, again, seek Daniel outside. And yeah, we'll talk to you guys soon. So now you guys can go to coffee break, enjoy some coffee, some food. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.